In this video, I'm going to show you how I set up my reverse osmosis system for my reefing aquarium to finally achieve 0 TDS. I will also show you my 6 mistakes I've done during the process. I will show you what my final setup is, and I will show you my general understanding of what the RODI system is. There are no swear words in English and Polish vocabulary I did not use during this process, not to mention the amount of money I just threw down the drain, literally. So I hope this video will help someone not to go through what I have been. Enjoy! Since I am inexperienced in this hobby, every time something bad happens in my reefing aquarium, I not only need to ask someone for help, but also I'm trying to find relevant information to help me understand why that happens. And the problem with that is that I am quite often overcomplicating the issue, which in fact can be very basic. In my last video, I was going on about lithium too low, strontium too high, and I was asking all these questions, you know, perhaps that causing my corals to die, until Deep Reef placed a comment. It has to be something very basic. And the basic it was. I started with my reverse osmosis system, and then I realized that the last time I've changed the filters there, it was over half a year ago. So when I've actually started changing the filter, I think I found my very first basic problem. And here we have my 5 micron sediment filter containing enough metal to make a trip to scrapyard worthwhile. When I rang my friend to ask, is that normal? He asked me what color do I have, and I said it's brown and slimy. And he says, no, it's impossible. You're looking for more like a dark coffee with a little bit of a meal. I said to him, well, Robert, let me put it this way. When you're in the toilet, you know what, just forget it. As you can see, that rusty looking like water was going through the sediment filter, to the carbon filter, then to the other carbon filter, through the membrane, and through the DI, and then finally was getting into my aquarium. Well, at least some of it. So, even though I'm not experienced reefer, I kind of know that that was bad. I'm not going to show you the step-by-step of how I assembled my reverse osmosis system, but instead I'm gonna run through of what I've done and why. So firstly, because my tap water has a TDS of almost 300, which is very high, I've noticed that after I've changed my filters and I produced 1000 liters of water, my sediment filter looked almost as bad as you've seen a few seconds earlier. So that got me thinking, and I've decided to increase amount of the sediment filters. So by the time that the first one get really bad, and for any reason I forgot to change it, I will still have a few along the line. Now also, the first 3 filters, these are the new containers, I am using for 5 micron sediment filters. And then the 4th one is for my 1 micron sediment filter. Only after that I've got 2 carbon ones and then my membrane. How exactly this is going to work I'm not sure, so I'm currently testing this, but I think that should improve the overall performance of my reverse osmosis system. Deionization. I doubled it. As I updated my sediment filters, I thought I might just add 1 more container for the DI resin. Having that in place, I can now measure my TDS in 3 points. The first point is between my membrane and first DI, then between the first DI and the second DI, and then the third one is on the outlet to my water tank, which is after the second DI. Now, on top of that, I decided to put some pressure gauges as well. Now, I had my first pressure gauge, which was in a completely wrong place. Not only it was in a wrong place, but because it was where it was, I was using my RO system completely wrong. Because using the shut-off valve, I was trying to close and force the system to create a pressure after DI unit, because I've heard somewhere that it needs to be a certain pressure in the membrane and so on. Obviously, the pressure after the DI has nothing to do with the membrane, but I didn't know that. So at the moment, I put my pressure gauge just before the entry to the membrane, and then another pressure gauge I put after the 3-5 micron sediment filters. So if that pressure drops, I know they are getting blocked, although they are transparent so I can actually see that they're changing the color, but nevertheless I just want that to be there. And then the third gauge I've put between the two carbon filters. Now, it's not really to measure the carbon filter, but to actually see whether my 1 micron sediment filter is getting blocked. Okay, so now let me run through my entire system. My water supply is connected to the white tube, which then converts into red one, and that runs all the way to my first sediment filter, which is the 5 micron one. From that point, the water has to go through the first sediment filter, 5 micron, then runs to the second one, also 5 micron, and then moves to the third one, also 5 microns. From that point, the orange tube goes all the way to my original RO filter system and enters the fourth container with the sediment filter, where this one is 1 micron. From that point, it moves to the first granular activated carbon filter and then runs through the block carbon filter. And that was the last pre-filter stage before the membrane. Now, once the water goes through the membrane, it will run all the way to the first DI unit. Once successfully run through my first DI unit, it will go to my second DI unit. So this is the polish beyond polish of the TDS. So now from that point, this perfectly crystal clear 0 TDS magnificent water runs all the way up to my water pipe system, which runs to my 1000 liter tank. Okay, so now I'm gonna run quickly through my 6 mistakes I found I've made during this beautiful process of setting up this reverse osmosis deionization super system. My first mistake was not calibrating the TDS meter. Now, I bought this TDS meter from Reef factory so I can have that remotely monitored, and therefore if the TDS goes up, I will get a notification and I can react very quickly, obviously, to do something about it. Now, the problem was that when I unpacked this sensor, and I'm not a really patient person, I've decided to use it straight away. So I didn't even run through the initial setup. I just took it out of the box, powered up, and then I've noticed that it's reading a TDS. Now, it was reading a high TDS, but I thought it was calibrated by default. And that was my very first problem, because the entire process of changing the filters and checking my carbon filters, membrane and all of that, it was measured by that very sensor, which, as I've discovered after all the drama I've been through, that it was simply not calibrated. So at the moment I've got 4 TDS meters. So we've got one from the reef factory, I've got one, the very standard one, where everyone's got it, I'm pretty sure, with the 2 probes. One is on the inlet to the RO filter and one is on the outlet. And the other one is the like a manual one, which I believe is also very popular. Looks like that. Now, the reason I bought this is because I've seen this particular meter in many of the videos I've been through, so I thought this is the right one. Nevertheless, this sensor or this probe I can actually calibrate, and therefore I think this is probably the most accurate sensor I've got at the moment. Now, to calibrate that sensor, I'm using this calibration solution. So it needs to read 342 ppm, and that's what it was. I did had to tighten up the screw a little bit so I can reach 242 because it was less, but yeah, so that's how I know that the water, you know, eventually got to 0. So only when it comes to using that probe, the handheld one, I've realized that I've made a mistake of just not calibrating the reef factory TDS meter. So once I've done this, everything, you know, went away. So I believe maybe what I've done with my RO system is slightly over the top, but nevertheless, at least I feel quite confident now with my water. So that was my first mistake. So whoever is doing what I've been doing, always make sure that your TDS is actually reading 0. So you have like 100% or 99% sure that this is right. So issue number 2 I had was the wrong membrane. Now I went to the shop. Now bear in mind that I did not really put any effort to actually understand the RO filter. I just knew that I had to have it, so I bought it, installed it, you know, as much as I could, and that was it. So when I went to the shop, and I've asked the lady, you know, which membrane should I get? Because bear in mind, I didn't even know that I'm on the membrane 50. That my system was designed for a 50 membrane. So the lady in the shop says, well, go with 150 if you can afford it. So I said, well, I can afford it, so I got 150. I did not mention to her that my system is designed for 50, which means my restrictor is for 50, not 150. So I put the membrane in, running up, and then it wasn't really working as I wanted. Now, at that point, remember that at that point, my reef factory TDS meter was not calibrated. So that was showing me, you know, 15 TDS, which was obviously, you know, way too high. But the other TDS meter, which I cannot actually recalibrate, but that was showing quite high as well. So that's why I knew it was not right. Now, whether that was actually a problem, I'm not sure. Maybe if you put 150 membrane and 50 restrictor, maybe it will still work. I'm not quite sure. But I think you should use a proper tool for a proper job. So I call this my second mistake. Now, my third mistake was the gauge in a completely wrong place. As I've explained earlier, for some strange reason, I've seen on other YouTube channels that people say the gauge is very important, just make sure you've got a certain pressure. Now, certain pressure, I didn't even know what sort of pressure I'm looking for, but someone says something 20 or 40 psi or something like that. So I thought, okay, well, as long as I can keep a certain pressure, it will be fine. So I put this gauge on an outlet of the DI, which goes straight to my aquarium. And then after that gauge, I put a ball valve. So when my when my system was working, I was closing the shutoff valve to increase the pressure on my gauge to like 20 or 30 psi, and I was leaving like that. So now, as I know how this is working, I really don't know why I've done this, or I know because I didn't know what I was doing. So that's what I've done it. But based on that mistakes, I can only urge, especially new people, to properly research a particular element of how to use it. Because otherwise, not only you're gonna waste loads of money, but you're gonna waste loads of time. And at least the time is very crucial for me. So, you know, I thought I will just follow whatever the advice I've been given over the YouTube or other friends. But I was just blindly taking the advice and buying the unit, setting up, and I was hoping that was it. And I will refer to one of the comments I've got from one of the guys, you know, watch one of my videos, that I am a classic example of a person trying to go too quickly through that hobby. And I am 100% agreeing to that. I am probably the classic example. I just don't have time, but I want the result. So the bottom line is, the gauge should not be installed after the DI unit, the water which goes straight to your tank or to your reservoir. It should be a just clean pipe going straight in with probably a sensor for a TDS. That was it. So that gauge supposed to be between your pump and the membrane, because that is what you really need to know and pay attention whether you've got enough pressure over there. I believe you shouldn't go too high because your overall system is not designed to work at like over the 150 psi. So you have to remember not to go over a certain pressure, because otherwise your hoses and everything start leaking. But at least the pump I've got, and that was a typical unit, it can reach up to 100 psi at the moment, and I think this is more than enough. Now, mistake number 4 was to make sure you put your pre-filters in the right way around. So on the cartridges, now the mistake I've made was actually on the DI resin, but on the cartridge you've got an arrow pointing up, and also it says this side up, and it's clearly visible. So if you put that upside down, it's not gonna really work as supposed to. So again, I figured this out almost till the end of my saga with the RO system, which was obviously creating a certain problems. I had a point where my TDS after the membrane was like, let's say 5, but then the TDS after the first DI unit was 6 or 7. Now, I don't know why. I don't know why it actually increased, even though the resin was upside down, but you know, it was weird. It was a constant battle with setting up this system. So when I rang one of my friends and I said that, you know, I don't know what's going on in here, I need some magic, I guess, because it's, and it was so frustrating. And then he said, well, maybe just, you know, check your pre-filters, you know, just make sure they all tight and stuff. So I didn't really want to believe that because it's so obvious, you know, I'm not going to be checking stuff which are so obvious, you know, ignorance. But then I just went through my clear containers And that's what I've noticed. In that one DI, the arrow was pointing downwards. And then the description where the arrow was pointing was upside down. So I kind of knew already that that was a mistake. Now, just after I've changed that, I've actually opened all the other containers just to make sure that they are all properly fitted. Another mistake, which that might not be a huge mistake, but nevertheless I've seen it, the friends of mine, they told me that I should do that, and I also seen that in some of the videos, that once we filling up the resin for the DI unit, we should compress it as much as possible. When I've done my DI unit twice, I replaced the resin twice, I was just simply pour the resin in, you know, clear the top, and then stick the cover and put it in, and that was it. Now, what I know so far, that the resin, as the time goes by, the resin is getting smaller. So it's becoming not as tight as it was when I filled everything in. So now once I put the resin in, I'm trying to squeeze it with using you know, various items, just to try to compress it as much as possible and then fill it up, you know, to the edges. And then once I cannot squeeze that anymore, then I put my lid, and then I will fill into the cover. And the last mistake, which is a very obvious mistake, I guess, for everyone, and the simplest thing which I supposed to be doing, and that is replacing the pre-filters. So as soon as the sediment filter gets, you know, brownish color, well, at least this is what I know now, as soon as that becoming changing the color, I really want to replace that. So now, as I've got 3 5-micron sediment filters, I can see straight away what's happening. So since I've done this setup, even on this video you can see that the first filter is already yellow, and it's yellow because the moment I put a fresh sediment filter in, after literally 10-20 liters, already changes color. And as I showed you earlier in this video, my water, my tap water, has almost 300, the TDS reading is almost 300, which is very high. I know that some guys on some videos, their tap water is 30, which is like, you know, incredible. But mine is almost 300. So that sediment filter, when I produced a 1000 liter of RO water, so I just filled up my tank, that filter, the first sediment filter, was already slimy, brown and slimy. So clearly I have to change that filters much often. So now, as I have a clear containers, I can see when the color is changing, and therefore when the color is changing, I'm just going to replace that. Now today, as I'm recording this video, I've already changed that first filter, which you've seen at the beginning of this video. I've changed that twice already because it was becoming brown. It was yellow, it was getting then kind of orange kind of color, and at that point I just want to replace it. The other two are still white. I mean, you can see a slight color change, but they are still pretty much white. And therefore, I trust that my 1 micron filter will still be okay. But in the next probably another 1000 liter, I am going to replace them all again, and I just want to see what the state of them. So once I change all the filters, I'm gonna just write all the dates, where they've been changed, and therefore I know roughly how often I need to change the sediment filter, how often do I need to change the carbon filters, and obviously, you know, how long my membrane is gonna last. At the moment, as you've seen, I've got the TDS on just after the membrane, then after the first DI, and obviously after the second DI, so I can monitor that. But the most important thing for me, or the biggest achievement for me, was that I can actually achieve 0 TDS after the membrane, and obviously after the first DI and the second DI, it's just maintaining the 0 TDS. So only today, which has been already few days of creating this video, and the RO unit were kept working, I've noticed that the TDS after the membrane jumped to 1. And that was probably because of that first sediment filter. Because once I changed that one sediment filter, the very first one, to the fresh one, the TDS after the membrane drops to 0 again. So obviously that filter makes a huge difference, at least from my experience. Well, thank you very much for watching if you lasted so long. The video is supposed to be 10 minutes long, but it's a bit longer. Not only I'm new in aquarium hobby, but I'm also new in the YouTube thing. So any feedback, any comments are priceless to me. And I'm very thankful for every single one of them. Just before I actually started this hobby, I had a budget for that at about £500. And I am not joking. And now, since I went slightly over the budget, I would really love to share the experience of going through this hobby with as many as possible. So that being said, please do subscribe, click the like or dislike, and turn on notification so you will be notified every time I post a video.